Medibank's hackers prepare to release customer data to the internet. James Hardie issues a profit warning as global housing markets slow. And all eyes on the US as voters go to the polls in the midterm elections. It's Wednesday, the 9th of November, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, do you know what today is?
I do, Michael.
What is it? Go on.
I know it's one of your favourite days in the week.
That's right. Today is the day that there is a new episode of our other podcast, How Do They Afford That? This is the podcast that we do with Canna Campbell, the founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform. And the topic that we are getting into in today's episode is superannuation, and really all of those questions about super, like how much should you actually have? Is it possible to increase your super balance as you go kind of beyond what your employer is already contributing? Kind of the different tips and a few ideas to consider about superannuation. Really useful information. And really the thing that I kind of take away from it is that it is never too late or too early, really, to start thinking seriously about your superannuation.
Absolutely right. And it's such a great personal question as well, because how much is enough is really something you have to consider to do that. And I must say, as the youngest member of the Fear and Greed family, Michael, how do they afford that? I think these podcasts are excellent. So well done to you and Canna. I really enjoy listening to them, and I'll be getting onto that this morning.
Oh, thank you very much. And you can find that How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts. And we will also put a link in today's show notes. So just make it very, very easy. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe so that you get a new episode every Wednesday. So that one's coming out today. We've also got a really good interview coming up after this show. And Adam, I know I often make fun of Sean Aylmer for being a bit of a data nut. But I think I have met his match in Adam Lang, Adam Data Lang, as we now call you, because you really, really love your data. And Qualtrics is the company. Bridget Archibald is the Asia Pacific and Japan Managing Director at Qualtrics, and it is all about data.
I know. What's not to love about that, right? And also, what are the insights you can get from that data? And so the great chat with Bridget was just about not just the 17,000 customers that they work with worldwide, but how they use data to improve customer experience programs and employee experience programs. So how they turn that data into great insights for businesses to make better decisions.
Yeah, it is a really good chat. It's coming up after the show, so stick around for that one. But the main story this morning, Adam, the criminals who stole personal and health data from Medibank, the private health insurer, say that they will release the information to the internet in the next 24 hours. And considering they actually said this kind of yesterday, that means the clock is ticking. The threat came via a Russian-backed internet service called REvil, which is capital R, capital E, VIL, REvil, which, believe it or not, is a ransomware as a service website that essentially provides ransom services to criminals for a fee. So Medibank says just under 10 million people are affected by the security breach. And as we discussed yesterday, mostly it's data like names and phone numbers. But for 500,000 people, it's also medical service provider info and the details of diagnoses and medical procedures, kind of really personal data.
Yes, Michael, and the threat to release the data comes a day after Medibank Chief Executive David Koskar said he was not paying a ransom for the stolen data because it would just encourage the criminals. And we're seeing how this is now playing out. The hackers published what they say is a quote from Confucius: "A man who has committed a mistake and doesn't correct it is committing another mistake." And they also added a PS: "Sell Medibank stocks." They even linked to an ABC comedian's video about the hack.
Yeah, Medibank shares fell 1.8% or nearly 1.8% yesterday. There's a bit of concern that the company could be up for billions of dollars in damages. One class action was kicked off yesterday and more are likely to follow. For customers, it means you need to be alert for scam calls and emails if the data is released. Medibank CEO says you should verify any communications and transactions. Don't open texts from unknown numbers. Make sure your passwords are strong and not reused across sites. I mean, mean, it's kind of the standard advice, really, that we should all be doing, even if you're not a Medibank customer. He says that Medibank will never call you seeking a password or sensitive information.
Michael, the government has backed Medibank's decision not to pay a ransom. Home Affairs and Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neill said the move was consistent with government advice. She says she wants Australia to be the most cyber-safe country in the world and that the payment of ransoms directly undermines that goal. So this is playing out with so many levels. We have a hack, ransomware as a service, and now unfolding the possible release of this data.
Yeah, and then the government having their say on it as well, and the potential that you'll set a precedent of paying these ransoms. You just think that we have been talking about cybersecurity a lot recently, first with Optus and now with Medibank. There would be a lot of companies concerned that they may well be next.
Absolutely, and so everyone should be alert to this. I think we're doing great work as a federation of states in terms of the National Cybersecurity Agency and educating ourselves, but the trick is we're learning about this in real time. This is really new territory.
Yeah, and you do kind of get the feeling that in many cases, unfortunately, the criminals are a few steps ahead of where a lot of us are, particularly when you kind of look at small and medium-sized businesses who may not have the same money to put into security.
Absolutely right, Michael. And so you get this kind of orthodox business community who tends to follow the rule of law, and then they're trying to interact with a very unorthodox, non-rule following criminal community that's operating beyond borders.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very worrying situation. All right, now turning to local markets, and Australian shares closed higher yesterday. Adam, the S&P ASX 200 lifted 0.4%. to 6,959 points. On the large caps, Mineral Resources posted the biggest gain yesterday, up nearly 5%. Pilbara Minerals was up 4.4%, and those gains were really on the back of, I suppose you describe them as pretty bullish price forecasts for lithium from one analyst. The Lottery Corporation, Adam, jumped nearly 4% after outlining plans, so I got to brace myself to say this, to lift the price of Powerball tickets. Now, I've spoken many times recently about my fondness for Powerball and other lotteries, so I'm just kind of processing that one slowly. The Lottery Corporation was spun out of Tabcorp earlier this year, and the company says it's lifted revenue 11% for the first few months of 2023.
And on the other side of the ledger, Michael, James Hardie Industries slumped 13.7% to $28.81 after warning of a global housing slowdown. The energy companies were also weaker. Whitehaven fell 5.5%, New Hope Corporation fell 7.75%, and gas major Santos slumped 5.3%. That comes after the threats of price caps in the energy sector. The dollar was pretty steady. It's buying 64.5 US cents.
And just briefly, Adam, globally, investors, particularly in the US, are waiting for the outcome of the midterms, as well as inflation data for October, which is out a little bit later in the week. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Adam, James Hardie has issued a profit warning due to weaker housing markets, saying that net profit for FY23 will fall below its previous expectations. Now, James Hardie makes fibre cement cladding used for home building, so that essentially means that it is very much exposed to the rate of new home construction around the world. So if there's any changes, you would think that James Hardie would be one of the first to notice it. The company says that profit after tax for the half year to September rose 22% to $300 million US dollars. But, and this is the key here, that it is warned that reductions in home building activity amid disruption, macroeconomic disruption really, and rising inflation mean that it's starting to see some softening volumes now right across its operations.
That's right, Michael. And James Hardie is seeing this in the recent period. So they've said there's been significant change to the outlook for the housing market activity in the last 45 days. It says new construction starts in North America have slowed significantly, while labour shortages and unfavourable weather in Australia are also constraining home builders.
Isn't that interesting that they're seeing things happening on such a short-term basis, and they're able to kind of forecast how that's going to play out really over just the data from the last 45 days?
Yeah, and I think importantly, Michael, for a lot of businesses, the speed in which data is being ingested, interpreted and acted upon, I think it's increasing all the time. And hopefully that'll help support businesses getting through challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not surprised at all that you managed to link this back to data, of course, as a bit of a data fiend.
As a data fan.
That's right. Now, metals recycler Sims has also issued a profit warning, telling shareholders that inflation and softening market conditions are affecting its results. Sims blames significantly reduced economic activity for reducing scrap volumes and says increasing competition is tightening margins. Inflation, of course, also gets a mention. Sims says inflation is at multi-decade highs across all of its markets.
That's right, Michael. And Sims CEO Alistair Field says it's all short-term headwinds and he has faith in the medium-term outlook for the business. Shareholders, though, aren't so sure, selling the stock down nearly 10%.
Now, and what is certainly becoming a fairly common and consistent theme, inflation is also affecting Ingham's, the chicken company. Ingham's farms and processes chickens, and they say feed prices are elevated because of the Ukraine war. It doesn't expect change until mid-next year, and that means higher chicken prices.
That's right, Michael, and it's all about pricing power, the extent to which companies can pass on some of these increases in input costs, and what will the consumer be willing to pay. The news of higher feed prices came at Ingham's annual meeting, where it also told shareholders that transport costs were rising as fuel gets more expensive, but it says it's well placed to weather the conditions, and that's partly because it has already lifted prices across all channels and customers. CEO Andrew Reeves says price increases in Australia will make a meaningful contribution to the financial year 2023 results. The average selling price for Ingham's chicken products is up 6.6% from January to June. So we'll see how that plays out.
Isn't that interesting that if the average price for Ingham's chicken products, which are obviously one of the biggest suppliers of chickens, it clearly says that customers reporting that their shopping trolleys are getting more expensive. That's it right there, isn't it?
That's just one great example of it.
Yeah, a very, very direct kind of impact on the household budget. Consumer confidence, Adam, has taken a hit. 2 surveys out yesterday. One was from ANZ and Roy Morgan, and the other one came from Westpac. The ANZ survey measures how people feel about their finances and, among other things, asks if it's a good time to buy a major household item. And in this survey, most people say no.
So Westpac's survey also shows consumer sentiment continues to plumb historic lows. And that really underlines your point. Worryingly, about 40% of people plan to cut back Christmas spending, the highest proportion since Westpac started asking the question in its monthly survey back in 2009.
Now, this is an interesting one, Adam. Treasury has given the federal government the go-ahead to intervene in energy markets. This came out of Senate estimates yesterday. It was a statement that was read to estimates on behalf of Stephen Kennedy, the Treasury Secretary. And the statement said that increases in coal and gas prices caused by the war in Ukraine were important enough to, and this is a quote, bring into scope government intervention. It's fairly significant, but it doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. It does, however, represent a bit of a shift for the Treasury Department, which is generally pretty conservative and would normally be expected to argue for just kind of leaving things to market forces.
Yeah, Michael, those words, bring into scope government intervention, I think they're significant. The government is waiting for a report from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission later this month before making a decision on how to solve the gas crisis. And as we've been reporting, there's plenty of our audience interested in that very question.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, it seems a very good time to be releasing the How Do They Afford That podcast and talking about superannuation, because there is a debate happening about how much super we should be allowed to have. Financial Services Minister Stephen Jones says the government has not settled on how much superannuation is too much, but he wants to make sure super is being genuinely used to fund retirement and not just for shielding income from tax before handing it over to the kids. The debate is really all about how the government lifts taxes to reduce the budget deficit, really.
So super contributions and investment earnings are taxed at 15% for most people. And there's no tax at all on earnings for people drawing an income from their super in retirement. So the ideas for a cap on super balances range from kicking in at 5 million down to 2 million, depending on who you listen to. There's 11,000 people out there with more than 5 million in super. So if they invested that money outside super, they would each pay $70,000 in extra tax each year. Now, that's not a problem for most people. Caps on how much you can contribute should ensure that no one will ever again get some of the massive balances we hear about. Like, apparently, there's 30-odd people with more than $100 million each in their super. There's already a cap of $1.7 million for how much you can have in a tax-free retirement super account. So let's see where this discussion on caps on super comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And now seems a very good time to remind that we are not an investment podcast, and that includes superannuation, and you should always seek professional advice before making any investment decisions. Finally, Adam, how about this one? Very loosely kind of termed former billionaire Hamish Douglas has sold most of his shares in the funds management company he founded for $118 million. Now, we call him that a former billionaire, really, because if he'd sold his shares a couple of years ago, he would have got about $700 million more.
These are spectacular figures. Magellan Financial Group is the company, and it has had a rough time over the past few years as the share market's gyrations have caused big institutional clients to move their money away from the kind of mega cap US share portfolios that Magellan specialises in. Hamish Douglas was a rich list billionaire at one stage. Now he'll have to settle for a few $100 million. He stepped down earlier this year, and Magellan is now under new management, who have pledged to rebuild the business to its former heights.
All right, moving on to overseas news now, and voting in the US midterm elections is underway. Pundits say the Republicans should win a comfortable majority in the House and a slim majority in the Senate. Now, that would give them the ability really to put a stop to President Joe Biden's legislative agenda for the next 2 years, including things like climate action and abortion reforms. There is the chance that it could also mean the Republicans would investigate, possibly impeach the president and block any Supreme Court nominations. So there are some very kind of significant political repercussions based on the outcome of these elections.
That's true, Michael. And interestingly, for investors, it might not all be bad news. Markets tend to like Republicans in control of Congress because it stops the risk of Democrats spending money and running up deficits. Tighter fiscal policy should help get inflation under control, which eases some of the pressure to raise interest rates. Markets also hate uncertainty. US shares traditionally underperform leading up to the midterms and then perform well in the year following. That alone augurs well for improved market returns perhaps over the next 12 months.
Now, Adam, there's some more hints on the China COVID front too. This is a story kind of moving in increments, really, but it matters because China is such a huge driver of global growth. China, of course, has a strict zero COVID policy, which is dampening economic activity and locking hundreds of millions of people in their homes for weeks at a time.
That's true, Michael. And even the perception of the possibility of a change can be significant. Any loosening of that policy will send markets soaring on the prospect of growth restarting. The latest morsel is an exclusive in the Wall Street Journal that says China's leaders are, quote, considering steps towards reopening. End of quote. It's all still a guessing game, but one we're going to keep our eyes closely on.
The attention paid to those few words, considering steps towards reopening, it almost reminds me of economists reading the Reserve Bank minutes, kind of looking for clues in any individual word as to what might be going to happen.
It's an art form.
Yeah, it's a mystery, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, finally, one more, Adam, on Twitter.
But wait, there's more.
There is Elon Musk is the gift that just keeps on giving. And at the moment, he is just producing nonstop content because of Twitter. He says that usage of the social media platform is at an all-time high. He didn't actually give any details or explain how he's actually measured that usage. He literally just tweeted, Twitter usage is at an all-time high, lol. And then followed it up with, I just hope the servers don't melt.
I wonder if he'll take to wearing a Make Twitter Great Again hat.
Oh, I reckon, hey, maybe you should tweet him. And I reckon there is a very good chance that he would actually respond to that tweet if you did it. It's kind of very erratic in terms of what he does engage with. It's fascinating to watch.
He seems to be open to a lot of different ideas.
That's right. Even some from a humble Australian podcast.
Yes. So Elon Musk has also apparently emailed dozens of people that he fired over the weekend and asked them to come back. And he's delayed giving the blue verification tick to anyone who pays for it until after the midterm elections, just in case it's used for mischief during the vote.
Yeah, that's probably fairly responsible. Good move there. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Bridget Archibald, the Asia Pacific and Japan Managing Director at Qualtrics.
Yeah, Michael, and again, this is data and how it can be used to manage and improve customer and employee experience programs. They've got 17,000 clients around the world. Terrific insights.
Oh, you are in your element with this interview. It is a cracker.
I did enjoy it.
Oh, yes, of course you did. It is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And also don't forget to check out the latest episode of How Do They Afford That with Canna Campbell, the founder of Sugar Mama TV, all about superannuation this week. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 9th of November, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.